Hi, welcome to episode 87 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whidden, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Lori Seibel, who lives about 1,200 miles due west of me in Lincoln, Nebraska, where she works in community health. She was very kind to respond to a very random email from me at the reference of a fellow Lincoln resident, Ed Zimmer. So, Ed, thank you for connecting us. And Lori, thank you for joining me today. How are you doing? And could you share a bit of your story?
Good. I'm doing well. Welcome from Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm glad you're visiting for at least the next hour or so and getting a chance to talk about this part of the country. I'm doing well. My story, I'm a farm girl, grew up on a farm in southeast Nebraska. My dad farmed soybeans and corn. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was a teacher, but she stayed home during the time to raise my brother and I. I'm a middle child, so that might frame everything from here on out. But I was raised there, went to high school there. I graduated with a high school graduating class of 16.
Wow.
I can tell you all their names and their siblings' names and their pet names, and I knew everything. You knew everything about everybody, but it was a wonderful way to grow up, really. And while I didn't really probably know a whole lot about the world, I knew a lot about the people that lived in my community, and they all helped. It's kind of like really the personification of it takes a village, So left there, went to what was kind of considered to be pretty standard. You went to a local state college nearby, and it did that. And then in between graduating from college and thinking about what I was going to do for the rest of my life, I thought, now's my chance to explore the world a little bit. And I didn't get too far. I went to Madison, Wisconsin. And of course, from a small farm to a small state college. And then walking into Madison, Wisconsin, well, it's certainly a quintessential Midwestern city in a lot of ways. It also, they never let you forget what's going on in the rest of the world when you live in Madison. And so I learned a lot while I was there about the rest of the world. I became an epidemiologist. I became kind of fascinated by the whole story of Legionnaire's disease and becoming kind of a medical detective, if you will, trying to figure out what made people sick or what caused people to get sick. And of course, that was way before COVID. Little did we know that would become kind of the biggest epidemiology story of all. But came back to Lincoln, really, really liked the idea of staying in the Midwest and being around people that I knew and that I loved. So I stayed here, became the city's epidemiologist. So really spent a lot of time working with data, trying to figure out what drove certain health issues in the community, how to make people healthier, but also kind of doing that medical detective work. Whenever there was an outbreak of some kind of communicable disease, we all sprung into action trying to figure it out. And shortly after that, someone called me from the mayor's office in Lincoln. And just so you know, Lincoln's a city of about 300,000 people, and asked me if I would help sell the city hospital. And I didn't, of course, know anything about that, but I thought it sounded intriguing. And so that was kind of really my first foray into into really trying to understand what a community was thinking and how to put their wishes into action. There was a strong sense that because it was a safety net hospital, that people wanted to maintain some sense of control. And so we essentially sold the hospital to another hospital, local hospital, kind of going against the grain at that time, which was to sell it to a major hospital chain, national chain. And the city then realized the assets from that sale. And then the question is, what do we do with that money? So we went to the community again and asked them. They said they'd like an endowment so that it could help improve health and healthcare in our community. So we then created an endowment, and to wrap up maybe a longer story than you'd hope for, I
Not at all.
I I ended up being the president of the endowment, and I've been here the last 26 years. So kind of a snapshot of how I started out on a farm and ended up here having the opportunity to help make Lincoln a healthier place.
Wow. So how far away is your where you grew up from Lincoln?
It's about 75 miles from here.
Okay.
And so not too far, but it's gotten a little smaller over time, but I still think of it as home,
Hmm.
and I still know many people there and really respect the lives that they've had there.
Hmm. And so, what was there anything in your early experience that led you to be curious about epidemiology?
My mom was diagnosed with cancer, breast cancer, when I was about 10. And, times were different then, right? I mean, it's not, kids didn't go to the hospital and visit their parents. I mean, people weren't like, it's kind of funny in some ways because I can remember going to the local hospital, the little tiny local hospital, and they would actually put people's names, who was in the hospital. They would put them on a directory like in the lobby.
Yeah.
It was This was long before HIPAA, right? But
Yeah.
yet kids weren't really allowed to, they didn't want kids in the room. So the kids sat in the lobby, the parents went in. So that was kind of, my mom went through, pretty ruthless experience with breast cancer. She survived, but it wasn't
Oh.
easy. But I spent some of those years kind of being around health and, um, kind of trying to understand how that system worked, even in my young mind. My sister went off and became a physician. She's about 16 months older than me, and I became an epidemiologist. And I think part of that is certainly rooted in the fact that we had personal experience with the healthcare system when we were young.
Hmm. So, I guess I'm so tempted to go. I don't even actually know which direction to go because I'm so curious about both your work with epidemiology, but also Nebraska. I guess I'll start with Nebraska. But like for
Sure.
me, um, when I was looking up like where Lincoln is compared to New York, I was surprised to see it's like almost directly due west.
Yeah.
I didn't realize like it was the same latitude
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
New York.
You fly just pretty much straight across the country. Yeah.
Yeah. And then my father actually served and he was in the Air Force in Nebraska back in like the early 60s. So
Oh,
he's
Bellevue.
mentioned it. But I've never been there. Like what's can you speak on behalf of the entire state and just give us a little introduction as to like what Nebraska is about? I mean, it's one big, you know, kind of
Right in the smack in
rectangular
the
type
middle.
of state
Yeah.
with an interesting little twist on the bottom, I guess. Um, but other than that, I
Yeah.
really don't know much about it.
Well, sure. The eastern edge, as you know, is defined by the Missouri River, and so that's really the boundary that we didn't create. That was created just by virtue of where the river runs, and of course we're right next to Iowa, who we love to hate, and
Hmm.
then Colorado is to our west, and mostly that's kind of where we think of South Dakota and Kansas, and so we're landlocked. And I'm wearing my red today because I think if you were to ask any Nebraskan about what kind of defines them, it's probably kind of this sense of pride in the state they live in and the university that we have here. Our football team we're still hanging on to the 90s desperately, hoping to come back someday.
uh,
Um, but I would define Nebraska as, just kind of this patchwork quilt, if you will. It is, every community is defined a little different. I mean, you kind of think of it as rural and urban, being Lincoln and Omaha, but every small community is kind of, it has its own personality. A lot of them were formed, of course, when the pioneers came here and settled, and perhaps people came from a certain Germany and they settled here, or people came from the Czech Republic or from Bohemia and settled there. And so these communities were really, grew out of that heritage that they brought, the churches they established, the traditions that they brought. And I think you still see a lot of that today. You know, some towns, everybody in the town is Catholic, for example, and so everything kind of revolves around that identity. Another town will be all German, and they'll kind of revolve around that identity. Now, over the years, my husband was raised um, as a Mennonite, and now not Amish Mennonite, not even the very traditional Mennonite, but kind of a modern Mennonite. And the
What can you
community,
go a little bit more into what that is?
what a modern Mennonite is.
I was, I'm gonna
Um,
pretend we are a web page and I just clicked on modern Mennonite. What does that
I
tell
don't
me?
even know if that's a term. I mean, they don't have their traditional dress, and they don't drive buggies. I mean, they're just like you and me,
uh,
basically, but they have that heritage with the folks, Mennonites from Russia who came over. And so the town that he grew up in, not far from Lincoln, I mean, everybody was Mennonite when he was there. That was just a Mennonite community, modern Mennonite community. Today, that's different. People have moved, come and gone, but it still holds on pretty deeply to those roots. Much like I would say, you have communities in New York that have their own identities. I think we have that kind of across the state.
mhm.
Um, and so while people define us as flat, some of us are flat, some of us are very hilly on the side of the state. We're very hilly along the bluffs of the Missouri. Some people would say we're boring, and I think if you drive across I-80 and that's all you see of Nebraska, you would probably say, well, it's kind of flat and boring. But if you veer off in directions, you'll find the sand hills that are just absolutely gorgeous, and you'll find eastern Nebraska where there is hills and bluffs and wooded areas and sunsets that I think we can outrank anybody in that department. So um, I'm kind of wandering around, but to tell you that Nebraska is kind of a patchwork. There's a lot of different pieces to it, and every one of them is just a little bit different.
Yeah. Well, one of the, I guess, the things that I mean, you raise a very simple point, but I think that one of the things I've tried to learn to check myself on is like kind of not jumping to conclusions based on what you see. Like if you're driving, like if you drive through New Jersey and you're only on the New Jersey Turnpike and you judge New Jersey on the New Jersey Turnpike, you're going to have one opinion that is very limited. No more than like if you're in New York City and you only drive on the expressway, during rush hour, you're going to think it's just like traffic jammed and really unpleasant. But I live in Brownstone, Brooklyn, and it's this is where I've raised our kids and where they go walk around on their own and play basketball and meet friends and have pizza together. And it's it's not that it's not true. It's just it's only a small little sliver of the actual experience. And I appreciate the chance to learn about Nebraska a bit more than that.
Yeah, no, I would say that living here in Lincoln, like I said, 300,000 people may not seem large, but in a way, I'll go to the coffee shop, yesterday afternoon, and I'll know 10 people in having coffee who maybe don't even know each other, but you have this stop and talk thing. It's not an anonymous city in any way. I mean, it's got that 6 degrees of separation everywhere. And I love that. I love being able to go to the grocery store and say hi to people I know. Um, I really like the idea of knowing that we had a windstorm here the other day, a very unusual windstorm, and I've never seen people jump into action more quickly to help each other. Um, and so I like that. I like that
Mm,
part of it, and I like the seasons that we have here. I like a little bit of snow. Like I love a little bit of fall um, and all the seasons. So I really appreciate that part too.
yeah, well, same here. My wife's from Los Angeles, and the weather can be nice, and it's good. It's nice to not have to worry about rain too often. But like being there in the winter and kind of really feeling not any different than any of the other seasons, to me, kind of feels like it could be numbing after a while. Like as with you, I really enjoy those changes in weather. Do you have a favorite season? Because I think for me, I'd say New York. I like autumn best.
Oh, that's a hard question. I probably like. summer the least, only because kind of the promise of spring, the things, everything's just kind of here now, and it's you don't get to kind of see some of the real thing, or the color changes, or the things that are beginning to grow. But I like them all. I will tell you though, I've always said that if I could explain this, I think it explains what kind of sometimes is truly special about Nebraska. So if you are going through winter, and every day is, for a couple of weeks, every day is in the 20s or the 30s, or we've had snow or whatever, and you have that one day where the sun is shining and it hits 60 for some reason, the snow is draining, you can hear it running into the drain, street drains. It is a feeling of euphoria that I'm not sure
Yeah.
people in California understand.
No.
Everybody's in a great mood. And we don't even know, you can't even articulate, but at the end of the day, it's this euphoric experience, like, what did I do to deserve this day?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it gives you hope, and it
Yeah.
gives you this little sense of. So I've always said, if I could bottle that feeling of that, if you live in a state with no changes, if I could bottle that feeling of that one day, it is kind of magical, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah. I think what if in New York, I so in my full time job, I work in spirits distribution. So you talk to a lot of restaurants, and like what you'll notice is that the second the temperature like spikes to like 50, 55, people like want to eat outside, and like it feels like spring, even if it's like February. That first time you get that
Yeah,
hint of warmth, it's like glorious. People putting shorts on. Yeah.
it is. It's
Yeah.
like it just there's something that makes you feel suddenly like, I get why I live here. I live here for days like this,
Yeah.
because it's a feeling that it's, like I said, it's kind of magical. Yeah.
Yeah. No, what I think when I think about those seasons, I think um I think in New York, what I like about the fall is also it's like that there's a sense of like I feel like the new year almost really starts with the school year. And I think in living in New York City, the other rub is I think a lot of people like I grew up in the suburbs, but like in New York, as an adult you can hang out in the city, you can get by, but for kids, I think for most people like want their kids to kind of have some sense of nature, like you want like a pool or something. And if you have access to a summer camp, a sleepaway camp, or you have a second home or something, you want to get the kids to like have that experience, or you go on vacation. So during the summer, everybody's kind of scattered around. So I feel like the community comes back together and
Mm,
reforms with the beginning of the school year. So I feel like with the cooling weather and with everybody kind of back and it feels like normal again, I think that's probably what makes it feel probably like a better holiday than the spring, although that's great. And I think the other thing is that what I like about Halloween in New York City, at least like where we are, is like it's such a communal holiday. Like I guess I like to, in some respect, use this podcast to also just kind of dispel feelings or perceptions people might have of New York. But like Halloween in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, it's just overrun with kids and families like going around door to door and like seeing people. And like I guess that's almost like the euphoria here is where you just kind of you're almost like just enveloped by your neighbors and humanity, and it's like great to just see people with crazy costumes or just see
mhm.
people talking and hanging out on like brownstone or doorsteps talking to people. So
Yeah, yeah. I'll tell you, when I worked in the mayor's office, one year we had to cancel Halloween because of an early ice storm. It was an ice storm that hit, and there were, it was dangerous because there was maybe power lines down and some things, and so the mayor issued a cancellation of Halloween. And I'll tell you, he's always said that was that was the most difficult thing that he ever went through. The backlash of kids not being able to experience that, and kind of the community it created, even in that dangerous moment, people were very sad that went away. And I think in some ways it's also kind of that blast when you live temperate climate, or when you live in climates like ours, it's kind of the last chance to be out before people start to kind of, you know, weatherizing and get ready to spending more time indoors. And so taking that away was a very sad moment, but people
Yeah.
still talk about it 25 years later.
Yeah. So going back to you're wearing the color red for Nebraska. So I mean, obviously, if you hear the words Nebraska, you're immediately going to think of like the Cornhuskers and the university. Um, one question I was having is like, if you live in Nebraska, can you both be a rabid supporter of the University of Nebraska, but also a rabid supporter of whatever college you went to, or do you have to kind of choose then?
Well, this is because I went to the University of Wisconsin, right?
Okay.
And so people always ask me when Nebraska plays Wisconsin, um, what do I do? And I'll just be honest. I mean, if you're born here and raised here, it's not. It's like it's kind of your birthright. I mean, you don't even get a choice, really.
Hmm.
So my kids went to a different school, and of course, if they played each other, which they don't, I still think they're all in on Nebraska. If you marry into the family, reluctantly or not, you're all in. I mean, it's almost kind of like it's not really a choice.
Uh-huh.
It's a culture that you just that you adopt, and there's no way out.
So if you go to a college that's playing against Nebraska, who so you're saying like even if somebody went to a college like even a college within Nebraska and they're playing the University of Nebraska, who do they choose? Will
Well, they
they
don't
choose their
play
own
each
school?
other. We only have
Okay.
one university, so
Oh,
one
okay. That's
one
not playing
we
other schools
we
within
only
the
have
state.
one Big Ten,
Okay.
university. So that's the other reason why people are so passionate. It's you go to California, and you got
UCLA,
you
USC,
got them all,
Stanford,
yeah.
and yeah.
And you can kind of side with whoever's winning and go that direction. But here, it's like you're in
Hmm.
100%. It's what you got. And
Hmm.
I will tell you though that the game day experience, if you've ever been here on a game day, it is a very special thing. I mean, of community building. We talk all the time now about human connection, and we talk about how to create stronger connections with other people and build bridges and all that kind of thing. It is a very, very unique and special time of just kind of letting the rest of the world in the rear view mirror and just saying, for today, this is it. And
Hmm.
this is we have a reputation, and I think it's fairly earned, of being kind to our opponents, win or lose,
Hmm.
and it's more for the experience than anything. I think we want to be seen as a place that's kind and welcoming. That's just for, I think, the majority of the people. You just want to have a culture that says, hey, we're good people.
Right. You so it's interesting. You guys as you touch upon something and talk about Nebraska that also touches upon the epidemiology, which I think, which and I guess ties to like what we went through 4 years ago, which is like community. Like in some like it feels like, and I don't like my perception of, I guess the state of affairs in the country is I don't know that the tensions are new or just kind of being revealed because we are so more interconnected than we ever were before. And I don't even know if that tensions are being revealed. It's just all of a sudden, in the past, you could live in your bubble in Lincoln, Nebraska. I could live in my bubble in Brooklyn. And I didn't know what was really happening in Lincoln. You didn't know what was really happening here. But now we're all interconnected. Everybody's got phones. So all of a sudden, you're being confronted with all these alternative realities. And where I think, so I'd say, struggling to kind of like process them, assimilate them, learn how to deal with them. And so in that respect, I don't think it's actually troublesome that you're seeing the tensions. It's almost like growing pains. But I think the idea of community is where it comes back, I guess, with health too, right? Because with healthcare and everything else, the community or a sense of community is what helps people kind of adhere to the protective measures that are recommended to protect the community. And in that respect, how hard or easy is it to address, or how much of that part is your job? Like when you have epidemiology medicine, you think it's going to be all medicine, but how much of it is really addressing the softer parts of kind of human health.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that we'll always struggle with is the complexities that we've made out of healthcare, right? I mean, we've created such silos. And, you even look at something like mental health and physical health, and they've always been in these two separate silos, even though one of them drives the other, and vice versa. And so the whole idea that we're in these environments where you go to the doctor and say, I'm not sleeping, well, his only alternative may be to give you a drug because he's not able to address perhaps anxiety or depression in a way that someone in a building on the other side of town that has stigma attached to it can do that. And so we've created these silos. And then I think what happens in those environments is when something like COVID comes along and there becomes this need to intermingle a bunch of those things. There needs to intermingle a whole bunch of these silos that we created. Then the tensions start because it's like, who's in charge? You know, who's going to get the money? Who's going to get the recognition? And I think a lot of what happened during COVID here was, you know, trying to figure out, is the hospital in charge? Is the city government in charge? Is the health department in charge? And trying to figure out who you were going to align yourself with. I think as a community, we did really a great job. Not everybody agreed. I mean, not everybody agreed with mandates. Not everybody agreed. But I think at the end of the day, I would hope what I heard most people say is we tried to do our best. Was it without mistakes? No, but I mean, how could it not be, right? And when we got to the point, there's still people who will, to this day, die on the sword that it was all handled wrong, and um, and there are people who will die on the sword saying everything that was done was perfectly right. I would say the vast majority in the middle will say we tried, we did our best,
Yeah.
and we made mistakes. And hopefully we learned something that if God forbid this ever happens again, we can do it better or we can respond more quickly.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I answered your question except to say that I think it was these tensions between these various who's the leader of the band and
Mm-hmm.
when and why, and that to me created probably the most discourse in our community.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see very many remnants of that. I mean, in fact, I'm trying to think if I see any remnants of it. I think people tend to say, okay, let's move on.
Did you think, is it possible that part of the issue with it was dealing with it in one way versus different ways? For instance, like I live in New York City, and that for a while was, ground zero for the world in terms of like where at least you saw the numbers spiking. So like, and when I look back, I kind of feel like, and then my wife and I, our family, we lived for a month in like Western New York, which was very rural, and the feeling about the pandemic was understandably different. And because like, here in New York, you saw the refrigerator trucks of, that were ready for
Mm-hmm.
bodies.
Mm-hmm. We
um
suck. Yeah.
and then, but when you're in Western New York, where it's like totally rural and there's not a lot of people, it's not as big a deal. It's not, and it's not like they were ignorant. It wasn't in their face the way it was here. Like here, when you have 26,000 people per square mile,
Right.
a virus is an existential crisis. When it's 5 people per square mile, it just doesn't resonate the same.
But I also would say that in the rural communities here, I believe that there is a little bit of different. I mean, when you grow up in the rural part of Nebraska, especially if you grow up on a farm, life and death is a daily part of living. It is. You see cattle born, you see cattle die, there is a sense of the life cycle. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that in many rural parts of the state, especially people who have had limited resources to be able to access healthcare. I mean, I know there's parts of our state that you're not going to just drive down the street to a corner doctor's office, right? Or
Right.
you know, there's volunteers who come and pick you up and put you in the the guy who, your dentist is on the volunteer fire department and comes and picks you up and puts you and drives you, and so I think they're also used to dealing with a little bit more adversity. And so I also think that's part of it. People say, hey, another bump in the road, we'll figure it out. Where sometimes, in a more urban area, we have access to things more quickly, and we think people should respond more quickly. And there was a gentleman who collapsed in our yard, actually, just a couple of weeks ago. He had gotten bit by a bee, and he was having a reaction, and we called 911, and it took about 10 minutes to get there. And I was thinking, that's too long. Well, if I lived in my hometown, it would probably take 40 minutes for somebody to come. So there's also a different perspective of
Yeah.
urgency, I think when you live in different parts of in when your experiences are
Yeah.
different, kind of like yours, when you're in a more rural area.
Well, and I think that goes to like, the I have like these four core principles that I kind of use as my root for this podcast and for the other parts of the American Tributaries Project, which is about engaging people and I guess communities with like curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. And that's how I close the podcast. But I kind of settled on those because I realized that like there isn't the search for like kind of like one overarching truth is such a fruitless search in some respects, only because everything can be perceived so differently. And I
Hmm.
think like when I think back to what was happening during COVID, it maybe wasn't necessarily that people were behaving differently, but it was how people were responding to the different behavior. That was really the problem. It wasn't the
Yeah,
different behavior. It was the fact that people were either condemning people for wearing masks or not for wearing masks. People condemning people for getting vaccinated or not getting vaccinated. It was that was the tension.
yeah,
And it certainly wasn't like everywhere, but I think that's what you saw. And I don't know. I would like to see a post mortem on the COVID pandemic that's more honest about like what could have been done and something that's more, I guess, really addresses everything versus just saying this is what has to happen. It's something a little more maybe like nuanced.
yeah. No, I agree. And I think sometimes we forget, I say this a lot, that, I don't need to give my opinion on every topic. you know, I just don't need to. But
Mm,
some people have lost their way on that. They feel a need to give their opinion on every topic. And so we have this mass of voices shouting their opinion on every topic. And it's like, why don't we step back and say, there are people who spent the last 25 years of their career preparing for this, and they may not be perfect, but let's stop and listen for a minute.
yeah.
And I don't need to shout my opinion
Mm,
from day one without equipping myself with honest and accurate information. And that's where I think we've gone wrong. I used to look at Twitter or X, and it was like people would spout things that you knew they were wrong,
yeah.
but just because someone sees that, and that's where I think all of this discord has come from, is that people don't stop and take a breath. They don't say, okay, let me discern what is actually factual and
Right.
be committed to sharing factual information, not my perception, not my belief, not my desire to scorch the earth for someone else, but let's just share factual information. And again, there'll be some levels of a disagreement there as to what's factual and what isn't. But I think this just desire to give your opinion on every topic without having accurate or information or the expertise to do that is what's
Yeah.
creating so much of this. And so I've learned a little bit just to go, I don't need to give my opinion on every topic.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think what I've tried to do in like this my outreach through American Tributaries has been like more like trying to think about my opinion as more a work in progress. Like this is what I perceive, this is what I think. And I'll be honest, like when the whole COVID thing was first starting, the very beginning, I work in wine and spirits, and the idea of closing down restaurants was was something that was going to hurt me financially
Hmm.
and like my
Yep.
family, and I was kind of more skeptical of the whole thing, and just kind of feeling like, this is just one a long line of every year you feel like you hear something about some new virus and some new thing. And like, not that I didn't believe something bad was impossible, but I just was like, I feel like this is just one and another. But then I did actually have this like discussion, a heated discussion with some parents on a soccer team, and they were, I think they tolerated my skepticism enough to kind of like at least give me some facts that I was like, okay, I should look a little more into it. So I actually looked more into it and actually found myself changing my mind that night. But I think that the challenge is that you can have any opinion, and you can search up on the online anything that supports an opinion that you might have. So even though we have so much information, I think people need to learn more about how to not support your opinion but find the truth. And it's
Well,
different than just kind of searching, should I take the vaccine or not? Just like look at it, and it's not perfect. Yeah, there might very well be something wrong with the vaccine, but when you weigh the pluses and minuses, it seemed worth the risk. Other people might think differently. But sorry, I didn't mean
right.
to cut you off.
No, no, no. It's that discernment. That you've probably experienced this, or someone in your family where they get, a rash on their arm, and you go to Google and you look in Google, and immediately you have leprosy, right?
Yeah,
I
right.
mean, you now have 2 weeks to live because of
Yeah.
this rash on your arm. You've become Dr. Google, and you've diagnosed yourself. And I think it's kind of the same way with public discourse, is that we tend to be drawn to, what the worst thing is. We're drawn to allow the desire that to some extent the world has given us for sensationalism to kind of enter into the conversation. And so I think a little bit of that is we've become our own experts on everything because the information is available. But I always caution people to say, you can think you know a lot, but there's always going to be somebody who knows a lot more, who spent their career figuring this out, not the last 5 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, which you were doing. Did you in your studies, had you worked through scenarios that were similar to COVID?
Oh, nothing that big. I mean, certainly like the Legionnaires, and where a group of people, get sick, or some very interesting cases of tuberculosis in a convent, and how to. It was probably more about the populations that it happened in. Like if you have an outbreak in a daycare center, you handle that differently than if you have an outbreak in a frat house, right? Because the people are different, and how you communicate with them, but nothing of that magnitude. I never expected, I never saw that coming.
Mhm.
And so I was out of epidemiology at that point as active. I was over here now, and I watched afar for about 10 minutes with a little bit of envy, thinking, oh wow, that would have been great to be in the trenches of that, sitting around the table talking about that. I got over that after after a little bit, and realized, man, that uh, it was beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and we were just, I mean, for me, in some respect, like just, my daughter's getting ready to go to college next week, and when I think back to the family unit that we've had, those 4 years just for us as a family. I mean, we're not in healthcare. Nobody got really sick. We're still extremely. It was an intense time, and we were on the many, in some respects, periphery of the periphery, because we never were directly affected by it. I can't imagine what it was like for people that had the responsibility to either be figuring out solutions or to be on those healthcare lines.
Yeah. It was a trying time, and we've done some. So one of the things that we have done here at the endowment is, um, about, let's see, it's been about 10 years ago. I became, so back when I was in epidemiology, there's kind of a really famous story in epidemiology about Dr. John Snow. And I don't know if you know about that story, but he was an anesthesiologist and he lived in London. It was in the mid 1850s. And about that time, there was people got sick and died a lot, right? I mean, London was a really dirty city. It was coal smoke, and there was lots and lots of animals inside and outside of houses, and there was no sewer system. So, I mean, people got sick and died, as you can imagine. And he became kind of curious about why certain parts of London, many people would die from what they knew was cholera, um, and why they would die in just that part of a community. So he had a practice in London, and he actually decided he was going to go to an area of London where there was an outbreak. And this is again in the 1850s. And he went into London and he began to kind of just figure out, why are all these people dying? So he would like knock on people's doors and find out where people had died of cholera. And then he would start to map them on a map. On a map, he would draw little lines where people had died. Well, that story was always appealing to me, because at the end of the day, he looked at this map, this little hand-drawn map, and he discovered that all of the deaths were around a water pump. And it became clear to him at that point that water was causing cholera, probably because of all of the, people just got rid of their sewage by throwing it outside in the yards, and it was seeping down and through the ground. Well, no one believed that water was causing cholera. Everybody thought it was an airborne disease, because the air was so dirty and smelly that they thought that's just how it happened. So the whole story of this was, he had to take this data, this information, and then convince people, the officials and all of these people, that he had to turn the whole theory upside down and say, it's not the air, it is the water. And his whole story is how he used data and information, a really simple map, and essentially saved, how many tens of thousands of lives, because they finally turned off the water pump, or, got rid of the water pump, and the epidemic stopped. And they were able to say, okay, we need to really think about how we're handling human and animal waste from here on out, right? So that story was always appealing to me, because of how they just used this bit of data and this little map and kind of told this whole story and changed the world. So about 10 years ago, I started taking data, working with our local health department here, and mapping it, and thinking, okay, if this map could kind of tell stories about London in the 1850s, can we take data today and map it and see what stories it's telling us? So we've been doing that every 2 years for about 10 years. And I will tell you that it started out being kind of a way for us to help fund, because we're in philanthropy. So we want to use our money wisely. We want to say, where can we go and really invest? And it's become this incredibly, people are so drawn to this, not only because maps kind of tell a story, but because they're discovering parts of their own community that they've never been, or they've never been interested in. They've been able to see, as a church, for example, if we're located here, and here is where there is low food insecurity, what can we do in this place, right? Or if we're a school and we see over here that kids have really low fitness levels, what can we do differently? So it's kind of put the ownership into the community to say, how can you make your place better? And it's especially been fascinating, because I don't know if you know this about Lincoln, but we're a very diverse community. We have 300,000 people. We have about 30,000 immigrants and refugees living here. I think the number I heard last was that there are kids in Lincoln Public Schools. There's kids from 107 different countries coming to our public schools.
Would not think that.
In 130 different languages. So imagine people think of, okay, Lincoln Public Schools, white kids speak English. There's 130 different languages spoken in these schools. So when you start to take this information and you say, this is you think this is the community you're living in, but this is the community you're living in. And people start to uncover that and begin to say, wow, I didn't realize I was kind of sharing this community with all these other cultures and all these other languages and people who I didn't know that this was an area high in poverty. I didn't know that this neighborhood didn't have any healthy food access. Suddenly it puts you all in the same team.
Mhm.
and and it creates connections. We talked about creating human connections, and it starts helping you move in the same direction. So going back to COVID, one of the things that we did with those maps is we said, so if we take all this data, if we take where are there immigrants and refugees, where is there poverty, where is there a lack of English spoken, and we put them on a map. Now, God forbid COVID would ever happen again, we can say our response has to be here first. We didn't know that before when COVID happened. But here's the place where people are living in crowded places because, it's going to be spread more easily. Here's where people don't speak English, so you're going to have to get the information out in different languages. Here's where we don't have good transportation, so you're going to have to help people get to vaccination clinics. Um, so I only bring that up to say I think um, we did learn something from COVID, and we're trying to do better the next time around. And we're also
Mhm.
trying to find out things about our community we didn't know.
Yeah. You know, I, excuse me. Um, in like when I think back to what we all were going through and what was happening at times, and in some respects, it seems, I mean, pretty miraculous that we were able to get a vaccine so quickly and that we were able to kind of fairly move on within 4 years. I mean, to some sense of normalcy. I mean, obviously, there's lots of things that could have been done better, but when you think about how connected we are now compared to like 100 years ago, I mean, it seems to me that could have been a whole lot worse.
Oh, and like I said, and the key to all of it is what did we learn? What
Yeah.
could we do different? And if we're not willing to do that, then I think we'll be back in the same place next time. But I think if we say, okay, here's how we would do it differently. Here's what we should know so we can do it differently. And it'll never be perfect again, but it'll be better. And along the way, maybe we all learned a little bit more about Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for you, what's a perfect day in Lincoln for you? A day off.
Oh, wow. Um, so Lincoln has a huge trail system. We have trails all over our community. In fact, I can get on my bike at my house. I live 5.5 miles away from my office. I can get on my bike and bike here without getting off the trail. Um, in fact, my office sits at the intersection of all of the trails in Lincoln, and they're spread across. So if I look out my window right now, which I am, there's a trail going that way and there's a trail going this way. And all day I can sit here and I can see the daycare center down the street walking their kids down the trail. I can see the immigrant family walking their family this way. I can see students on their bikes. I can see joggers out. I mean, it's kind of the cross section the trails provide. So a great day for me would be getting up early, going out on the trail. Um, I don't run anymore, so just taking a long walk with my um, uh, on one of those days it's like 70, 72 in a wooded, we have lots of woods, and walk out in the woods on the trail. Probably hang with my kids and my husband, and go to some kind of an event, probably like a neighborhood festival or a concert.
Mhm.
Yeah, just nice and relaxing.
Yeah.
And this is the thing too about Lincoln is there's those of us, we love to travel. Most people here travel. Um, we love our state. We Most of us have done the things here, but people always say, "Oh, those poor people, they're so landlocked." It's like it's not like we can't go anywhere we want, you know. And so when we go and see the ocean, it is, you know, it's a grand event for us because we don't see it every day.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
So what's if you're gonna go out of state on a road trip, where does one go?
Oh, I don't know. People go everywhere. We love to go
Uh,
to the North Shore of Lake Superior.
Okay.
um, and just it's beautiful up there. That would be a great place we would go.
Mm,
Um, gosh, Colorado, go skiing,
mm,
um, or go to the mountains in the summer. Um, I don't know. Most people I talk to, I mean, not everybody can travel whenever they want, but if you can, most people just love to go somewhere and then come back home.
mm. Okay. Um, and you referred to Iowa, I think, before. Is
Oh
there
no,
one state that's like the arch rival for Nebraska?
Iowa, yeah,
Iowa.
Iowa. I don't even know really why, but you're just kind of like you're just told you have to hate Iowa. I don't know, I don't know why. I don't know exactly why it came about, but it's like you're just told you can't like them. Um, I think it's more of a sports thing, probably
uh,
anything else. But and it's kind of an inner like who has the best corn, I guess. I don't know. I don't
okay.
know. It's a
So
natural rivalry.
is the corn? I mean, are you very fluent in like corn agriculture as a Nebraskan?
Well, as a kid, if you grew up on a farm, I did, I didn't grow up on a dairy farm, so I was always really grateful that I didn't grow up on a great dairy farm because those were the kids who could never do anything because you had to get
Mm,
up in the morning, you had to milk, you had to go home after school and milk, and so I was always glad. Okay, I'm glad I'm not on a dairy farm. My dad didn't have cattle either, so it was just crops.
mm.
But every kid in Nebraska has walked the beans. I don't know if you know what that is, but
No, I
you get
don't.
up really early in the morning and they arm you with a very large machete,
Mm,
you know, and that they have carefully sharpened to make as sharp as possible. Um, I remember my dad, I'd be, 7 or 8, and he'd be sharpening this knife before he handed it off to me. And then, you go out in the fields and just cut out everything that's not a bean. And so you'd walk the rows and cut them all out, and that was your job every day. So you learned a really pretty good work ethic at a very young age. They would arm all these small children with very
it's
large, sharp
sharp
knives and
machete.
send us out into the fields and tell us to make sure that you didn't leave a single weed behind.
Sounds like
Um,
a Stephen King movie.
well, it was just a rite of passage, let me tell you. It was a rite of passage that
Uh,
you had to do that. And some people also, you know, went out and walked corn too. We didn't do
yeah.
that as much, but yeah. So
So,
I can tell you when it's supposed to grow, how tall it's
uh,
supposed to get. It used to
uh,
be knee high by the 4th of July. That was always the
uh,
thing. Your corn
uh,
should be knee high by the 4th of July. Now with the advent of, you know, fertilizers and everything, if it's usually shoulder high by the 4th of July.
uh, and and you said soybean. Your father grew soybeans and corn.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so when you say soybeans, like, is that the same as like edamame? Like what you like we
It's
have?
a, no, that would be from edible soybeans. Yeah, these are
Oh,
more of just used for feed and things like that. But yeah, no, this wouldn't be. I would say that would be more of an edible kind.
oh, okay, all
Now, my
right.
dad he would plant corn, which would be for feed corn, so it would
Mm-hmm,
be what you would feed the cattle. But then he would always change the corn in the planter for one row, and he would put in sweet corn, and then he would do the last row in sweet corn.
mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of we would have to go out and pick all the sweet corn and
Okay.
shuck it all and all of that. Yeah,
I'm reading this book called Braiding Sweetgrass,
yeah,
and
okay.
um, it's a Native American woman writing about all of these different chapters about different parts of agriculture and just kind of the natural world. But she writes about corn, and this blew my mind. But she said like basically the silk in corn is like connected to each silk goes to a different kernel, and she was like it's basically like a fallopian tube, and each
I've never
like
heard it
each
called that, but
but like it's like basically because like the silk is like captures the pollen, and so
right.
each kernel of corn is pollinated basically by a different father.
Oh, huh. That's news
I'm
to me.
checking what I
We
learned
never
again.
we
My
never got a we never got a reproductive lesson on corn. We just got a big knife.
Yeah,
That was
no,
it.
man, I might be making it sound more than words, but basically, like each kernel is pollinated by is individually pollinated, and each silk connects to a different kernel.
Huh. That's interesting. I'm gonna have to read up on that. I didn't know that was the case.
Yeah, so I mean, if I
Um,
understood that correctly, I just found that really interesting. That basically you've got all these different siblings on one ear of corn.
hmm. Well, when we moved to Lincoln, my husband and I were expecting our first child. Of course, you're looking for preschools or and so on. And there's a farm school here located on the edge of Lincoln, and it's a Montessori farm school. So the kids raise a garden, and they eat the food from the garden. They have horses they have to take care of, and chickens and all this. So we decided to go out there and visit when I was expecting our first child. And it is clear that if you grow up kind of on the land, if you grow up digging in a garden and walking the fields or whatever, that it probably never does leave you. I mean, it's just you're kind of rooted that way. And the minute I walked onto that farm, and I saw a kid, like I could still remember, he was walking around holding a chicken. He was trying to put the chicken back in the. I remember thinking, this is the place I want my kids to be, because I
Really?
felt like that experience that I had was kind of captured there. And so we sent both of our kids there, and it was really probably one of the best decisions we ever made as parents. But they would it was really their Disney World, I think.
Really?
Growing up, they they loved being out there, and so I was glad we were able to do that. And I think part of it, my husband didn't grow up on a farm, I did, and I think it was my push to say I want my kids to be able to go out and plant carrots and you know um, clean the hooves on a horse and all that kind of stuff. And
Uh,
so
wow. Do you have any animals at home?
no, well, we did. We've both of our pets are gone now, and we haven't replaced them. But having horses, horses are such beautiful animals, and but because my kids went to school there, the horses were there. They got to ride them every day, but it was part of their experience there. I didn't have to.
Yeah.
I didn't have to do that, so that worked out perfectly. I didn't have to take care of them. I didn't have to. I had a horse growing up. It wasn't particularly couldn't always it wasn't always a friendly horse, but so
uh,
I wasn't as drawn to horses as my kids were. They were
yeah.
just yeah.
Wow. And then what for? I guess for somebody like me, if I were to come to Nebraska and say, what would you recommend? What would you recommend I do to get to know Nebraska?
Well, you have to go to more than one place in Nebraska if you really want to know it. So I would probably, flying to Omaha. Omaha is a great, vibrant city. I think I'm right in saying that it has more millionaires per capita than any other city in the country. Obviously, a lot of Warren Buffett grew a lot of wealth in Omaha, but there's more Fortune 500 companies there than anywhere in the country. ConAgra and Kiewit and Berkshire Hathaway, and so it's a very vibrant, growing city. Um, Lots of great food, and it's known really for having great restaurants, and so certainly a snapshot of that. I think if Lincoln is great to come on football Saturday, I would just it's a great experience. I've had family here from elsewhere, and they've come and they've said, "Man, that was an experience." So definitely come here on a football Saturday, and then head west to go down the Niobrara River to learn about the Lewis and Clark journey across our state. See some of the wheel ruts still from the
Oh
Lewis and
wow.
Clark journey. Chimney Rock, which is the rock formation that when they got to Chimney Rock, they knew they were headed in the right direction. Um, Willa Cather, her home and what inspired her to write about Nebraska. Uh, yeah, and take a kayak down the Niobrara and see some of the bluffs on the sandhills. Certainly, yeah, I would. Coming just one place at one point in time would not quite tell you the whole story.
Yeah, no, for sure. How long does it take to drive across the state if you're driving reasonably within the limits of the speed limit?
Um, Gosh, that's a good question. Going to Colorado takes about 7 hours, so I always get mixed up because we lose an hour in there, so I
Mm,
always have to stop and think. But it's gonna be 6 hours to get from one end to the other.
okay, right. To go back where you were talking about football, is there is there some kind of like quintessential like tailgating food that one has at a Nebraska football game?
Well, tailgating is huge.
Uh,
You have your pick of about every food that you would want. Barbecue is big, burgers are big. We have a food here called Runzas. Runza restaurants are kind of uh, they're basically hamburger and cabbage and onion in kind of an enclosed pastry,
mm,
and so a lot of people have Runzas at
mm.
their tailgates. There's usually a lot of liquor involved.
That's kind of contrary to the whole community health thing, I would think.
Yeah, well,
You got to fight
there's
your
only
battles.
there's only 7 home games a year, so it's um, but that's part of you can join anybody's tailgate. You don't
Mhm.
have to be just go along and tell them you're from New York and they'll welcome you in. Yeah.
All right. And then, is there a quintessential, like, kind of Nebraskan food that just in more generally that you would serve at home or?
Oh, I mean, I suppose everybody would say beef or pork.
Uh,
I mean, it's like we do have great steaks here. We've got great, you'll have some of your best steaks if you go to a great steakhouse here.
mm,
I'm not a big meat eater, so, but I would say that if you're here in the summer today, you're going to have a barbecue. You're going to have some cold watermelon.
mm,
Somebody just grew in their garden. You'll have some fresh corn on the cob with butter, and that would be probably the kind of meal that you would find on a summer evening around here this
okay.
time of the year. People
Mm.
getting lots of produce out of their gardens this time of year.
Oh yeah,
A lot of bowls of tomatoes sitting out randomly at people's mailboxes saying, please take these.
really?
Yes. Cucumbers. It's like, oh my gosh, people everywhere. It's like, take these, take these.
I've only in the last few years have I discovered the sublime pleasure of a tomato sandwich.
Oh, just a tomato or
Just
tomato.
tomato on like two slices of toasted bread, probably with some mayonnaise, salt, pepper, and that's it.
Well, if you throw on so I grew up believing that everybody in the world ate tomato, bacon, and peanut butter sandwiches. And it wasn't until I got to college that I realized that wasn't a thing for anybody
I've
else.
never heard of that combination.
And I will tell you that if you take a piece of toast, warm toast, and put some peanut butter on it so it's kind of melty, slap a few pieces of crisp bacon on there, and a couple slices of tomatoes, you will experience something you will always remember. I thought it was actually. I cannot to this day understand why it's not a thing everywhere. So just give it a shot one time.
Well, I'm an advocate. Have you ever had salt on your ice cream?
Yes,
You
and I've
didn't dig it.
also no, and I also people the whole watermelon thing too. A lot of people put salt on watermelon.
Uh,
I don't understand that.
uh,
And I was just in Iceland, and the whole salted black licorice thing. I love
uh,
black licorice, but the
yeah,
salted black licorice, I don't get that either. So
yeah.
somewhere I've
Well, well, I don't necessarily want to, but to me, I think the salt can kind of like subdue the sweetness a little bit. Like what sometimes I've tried it on pineapple. My
oh
in-laws do that, and so it subdues the sweetness. And I think that I've done like salt crystals on like ice cream, and it kind of has a similar effect. But and that's a long-winded way of saying like I'm trying to frame my mind because I'm trying to be open-minded here. It's the whole point of American tributaries,
right,
and
right.
I'm kind of thinking that like if you think about tomato as it really is, which is a fruit, And because it does have sweetness, um, in some respects, it's kind of like more jelly like than you think. It's not quite as sweet as jelly, but I'm trying to frame this. I'm trying to work
Yeah,
with the
I'm
idea
working with
here.
you. Yeah.
So I'm
Okay.
kind of thinking that like the peanut butter and jelly works. So peanut butter and tomato, if you think about tomato as like a savory sweet fruit,
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
kind of work. And then bacon goes with anything.
And salty,
So
a little
yeah,
salt.
so a little salty. So I'm gonna try it, and much
I
probably to the consternation of my children when they see me doing this, but I've got to try it.
I I would be, you are the first person that I've ever told this to that has actually expressed a willingness to step out of his comfort zone and try this. So I'm going to
Really?
be very interested. Yeah. Most people immediately are like, they just get this look of horror on their face. And I tried to serve them to my husband, and he was like, no. But so I've always that was one of my major aha moments growing up was that not everyone in the world ate that. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm gonna give it a whirl. I'll
yeah.
report back and let you know.
Okay, I appreciate it.
um, but we should probably wrap up. And before we close, I'd love to ask, like, so, like, what gives you hope?
Oh wow, I'll tell you, I work in this field where we have a chance to make people's lives better, and I every time there is an issue that pops up, it is amazing to me that if asked, people respond. And if you have a family who moves here that needs an immigrant family from Afghanistan who came over here just a few years ago when they were evacuated and they left with nothing and they need a car, they get a car, people show up. And I think at the very root, at the very core of people, and you cut away all of the sensationalism and the drama and the opinion giving and all of that stuff. At the very root is this desire for people to help other people. And sometimes very quietly, sometimes very loudly. It doesn't really matter, but I get to see that all the time. And I know it exists. And I know there's good people in the world. And at some point, I think when we kind of dive and move away a lot of this other clutter. Maybe when you get through the political season, maybe when the tides settle a little bit, I think there will be a sense that we all essentially are in this together and we've got to figure it out.
Yeah, beautiful. And maybe as you were talking about it, maybe part of maybe there might be two things that play with like the media. Is one, you get eyeballs with sensationalism, and I always tell people, think about like when you're in high school, like in school, nobody pays attention to the kids working well, but everybody goes out to the schoolyard to watch the fight. So there's that. And then the other side is like, if you overhype good things, it almost seems like it could be self-serving. So like maybe the goodness is not going to be in our faces, and maybe I don't know, maybe like more under the radar things, and maybe it almost feels like maybe you need to have a little more trust and in human nature, and realize that we are good and not kind of fall or overreact to the negativity that we see, because we get too much negativity, and true goodness is not something that's in your face.
I agree. And I think sometime at some point we're going to understand that whatever messes exist are ones we've made ourselves. I
Mhm.
think we tend to say it's someone else's fault, it's someone else's fault, it's someone else's fault. But at the end of the day, if we all take ownership for the fact that whatever messes are out there we've made, and
Yeah.
if we've made them, then perhaps we can do something to say, let's undo some of this and come back to just a basic decency, good discourse, certainly conversations like this that you can talk on for an hour and we haven't yet fought, have we, Michael?
No, we have not.
Amazing.
Even when you
How
brought
about
up the
that?
peanut butter and tomato and
Yeah,
bacon.
it can happen. Conversations can happen,
Yeah,
and maybe we'll kind of straighten the ship just a little bit. And
yeah, I believe so. All right, great. Well, Lori, thank you so much for being open to even responding to my email, much
Oh,
less
sure.
actually having this call. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I did too. Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
And thank you to all the listeners and viewers out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right. Thanks so much.